Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm going to give everybody a few minutes to join here. Appreciate everybody coming today. I know we're getting close to the election and everybody has many things on their plate. So thank you for joining us today and thank you for our guest. All right. Looks like we have pretty much everybody in, so I will go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us today for this important public webinar so we can better understand how Ohio's election systems work. I'm Heather Nye. I'm with the League of Women Voters of Ohio. And with us today, we have Michelle Wilcox, the Director of Auglaize County Board of Elections, Terry Richards, Director, Wood County Board of Elections. I'm sorry, Terry Burton. It was a typo there. And Jess King, the Senior Policy Associate at Verified Voting. Our panel of experts will break down the critical steps in Ohio's post-election process and guide you through what happens after the polls close on Election Day. We're going to cover topics such as ballot tabulation, recounts, audits, and provisional voting. You'll also learn about election results, how they're certified, and what measures do they take to ensure security and accuracy of our elections. This webinar is going to have a comprehensive look at how Ohio safeguards the integrity of every vote. So a few housekeeping items before we begin. Please note that closed captioning is enabled for those who would like to activate that on your screens. If you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A, and we will get to as many as we can in the dedicated Q&A portion at the end of our program. And this program is being recorded and will be uploaded to YouTube by the end of the day. So if you are needing a recording to come back to that, we will have that for you. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So on post-election procedures and ensuring accuracy, my first question is for Terry Burton. What are the key steps that take place after the polls close on Election Day to ensure the accurate counting of votes?
Well, whenever you talk about the close of polls, you have to think about the precinct workers out there that are running the election. And the first thing that they do is they get all their totals from all their machines. They verify their totals between their electronic poll pads and their machine counts and make sure that everything matches up. And then they verify their paper ballots for anyone that submitted paper ballots or provisional ballots. And then they load that all up in the car and they return it in a bipartisan team. And once again, that's a word you're going to hear me say over and over. Much of the security in Ohio and much of the things that we do rely on representation from both of the major political parties. And that way, there's a check and a balance there. From our office all the way down through the poll workers, that's a process. So when they get in the car to return those election results to our office, they're in a bipartisan team. With the close of polls, our office goes into its own lockdown, and we are only accessible by the sheriffs and the poll workers. So we get those supplies picked up from the curb. We check in at the curb with, once again, bipartisan teams. And we get all their equipment and all their information, all the ballots that need to come out of that car. They get transferred into our office. And there's another couple steps where we go through the process of verifying that we have all the memory devices as well as all the ballot boxes that were issued to them. They come into our office. And once that's all verified, then they go into the tabulation room.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Michelle, could you further explain a little bit of the process on how the ballot tabulation and how the integrity of that process is maintained?
Yeah. First of all, I want to explain that Ohio is a paper state. Even though in Terry's County, you might touch the screen and make your choice, but there is a verified paper trail. So in Auglaize County, we actually vote by paper. So they make their choice by filling in a bubble and then scanning that ballot through the tabulator. So what happens then is a bipartisan team, we actually have a rover that goes around and picks up our memory sticks in a bipartisan team. So they bring those in, and like Terry said, then the bipartisan team of election officials, they will bring your supplies and bring things back, your voted, your unvoted ballots, and they'll bring those in. So what we do is a bipartisan team, and actually too, all chain of custodies. You either, whether it's electronic chain of custody or as simple as a piece of paper that they have to sign saying they dropped it off, and our bipartisan team has to sign saying that we received it. And even when they walk upstairs, a bipartisan team receives that USB memory stick, and then they check it in, and then they bring it into the tabulation room where our bipartisan team would then upload those results into the tabulation, and then that's how we would get our results. And then how we take those results then, and then it's a USB stick that is only provided by the Secretary of State, because again, nothing is hooked to the internet. Our machines are not hooked to the internet. Our computers out here are not hooked. The only thing hooked to the internet to have to do with tabulation is the Secretary of State provided computer that you put that one-time use USB memory stick in. So you do those on intervals. You will come in, you will do your absentee ballots first, you'll upload those to the state, and as the night progresses, again with that bipartisan team, nothing on the internet, inside the tabulation room, and then they will start uploading those results. So again, remember too, there is always a chain of custody. There's always somebody dropped something off. We received it. It's correct. Here's the lock number and such. So that's how the ballots are tabulated at night here in the tabulation room and then sent to the Secretary of State's office.
Thank you for that, Michelle. My next question is for Jess. We've heard the word bipartisan mentioned several times. So could you further explain a little bit, how do the bipartisan election boards in Ohio work together so that they ensure fairness and transparency in the tabulation process?
Absolutely. Part of what makes Ohio elections and Ohio election officials so successful is that the same processes and procedures are followed regardless of the size and the scope of the election or the margin of victory in a race. Each and every valid ballot will be counted. However, recounts are conducted automatically when the margin of victory in a contest is less than or equal to 1/2%. And also post-election audits are conducted to ensure that the results reported by the Board of Elections are accurate. Bipartisan, chain of custody, those are words. I echo Michelle and Terry. You're going to hear those words because they are part of the process. They are embedded in the process and they are taken very seriously. There are rooms and places in a board of elections that you need a Democrat and a Republican to get into. I was an election official for 10 years. And there are spaces and rooms in that building that I was never in alone and never in without somebody who was a member of the opposite party. It's so important just to have that balance, to have that sense of security that someone from both sides of the major parties are in the room and making sure that what is going on is fair, safe, accurate, and transparent.
Thank you for that. My next question is for Terry. If you could explain how local election boards ensure that both the absentee and in-person ballots are counted fairly and accurately, and maybe like what's the difference between the two?
Sorry, I had to make sure I was unmuted. Absentee ballots are mailed ballots that are requested by a voter here in Ohio. This year, everybody got an application in the mail that was a registered voter that was sent out by the Secretary of State's office. When we get that application, we go through the process on the application of verifying the name, the address, the ID information, the signature based on the voter registration signature. And so even at that first step, we're doing our best to make sure that we know that the person that requested the ballot is the voter themselves. Once those ballots are issued and they come back to us, once again on those envelopes that the ballots are contained in, we are, again, double checking that the name and the address that they have on file matches what we have in our system, that the ID information and the signature, once again, match our system. And so through all that, we're able to ensure that the person that voted the ballot or returned the ballot is the person that we sent it to. Our absentee rooms, as was discussed, are secure facilities inside our site. They're rooms, inside our building that are kept secure and are opened only by bipartisan teams. When we go through the process of getting those ballots from envelope to the tabulator, each step in that process is also done in teams. We do all our opening and our sorting, making sure all the precincts are together, and then even through the transport from one room to another, we make sure that there's representation on both sides. So that's the process that we go through the absentee process. The regular voters that go to the polls on election day, once again, it's the precinct elections officials that kind of are our main source of security. When a voter checks in, they provide a photo ID. Ohio has 3 versions of that now: the state ID or driver's license, the passport, or the military ID. And so the poll worker checks that. They verify verbally that the individual lives at the address that they have on file with our office. And then once that all matches, then the poll worker, issues them either a paper ballot or, in our case, a voter card, and they're able to go to the polls and vote. In that process, then, as we talked, once those ballots are collected, those memory sticks are collected, they're returned to our office through that process. And as Michelle said, the tabulation room all the way through is a very managed, very precise process that is double checked and audited by both parties all the way through the process.
Thank you so much. Michelle, can you tell us what are provisional ballots and how are they verified and counted?
Okay. First of all, I want to tell you the look on a voter's face when you have to vote, when you have to tell them they have to vote a provisional. But I try to turn it into a positive. I try to explain that this is our Board of Elections safeguard. This is if you don't have your ID, if you changed your name, if you're not in the e-poll book. This is so we can get you updated. You put your ballot, it doesn't go through the scanner. You put your ballot in there, you seal it up, you make sure they show your ID. And also you have 4 days to cure that provisional ballot. So what a provisional ballot then, once the board is, let's say somebody moved in from Miami County and they tell you, oh shoot, I forgot to update my address. Once the board gets a hold of Miami County and they find out that they did not vote there, and then their ballot will count. If they didn't have their ID, they bring in their ID within the next 4 days, or they bring in their marriage certificate where their name has changed. And then that provisional ballot will count at this final certification. And the other great part is that now counts as their registration. You take that right off the front of the envelope, and then that has them updated, and that has them ready to go for the next election. So that's how in our office we turn it into, because of course, all the rumors about who's voting that shouldn't. This actually, when you tell them it's our safeguard and it's to protect, to make sure that the ones who can vote, then they're okay with it. And then again, at the final certification, if they were not registered, because by law, you have to be registered within 30 days, certain things, checklists that the board goes through, and then the board will approve some of those. And of course, some won't count. But again, that counts as a voter registration, and we'll get them updated.
Thank you. Thanks for explaining that. I know there's a lot of confusion about provisional ballots, so it's nice to hear how that works exactly. My next question is for Terry. How are election audits conducted, and what role do they play in ensuring the security and accuracy of election results?
So the election audits happen after the official election. And you kind of have to understand the whole process that goes. So on election night, we have unofficial results, which are everything we have from early voting and absentee, as well as on election day. Then you have the official results, which happen later, that include ballots that were postmarked by the Monday before and received by our office within the 4 days after election. And then, as Michelle said, those provisional ballots that are countable. And so then after the official certification, then we go to the audit. And what the audit does is the audit allows us to go through and basically verify that our process is working correctly. It's something that I know many counties have been doing for years, and it works very well. So after that certification, the audits are very close to a recount process. Basically, we hand count 5%. As Michelle very rightly said, all ballots in Ohio are paper. So when we go to that process of doing an audit, we go to the paper. We don't go to our computer tabulation. We hand count 5% of the paper. We verify it back to the automatic tabulation. And if that's verified, then we're able to move on. And we do that with 3 different county-wide races. And so that, once again, allows us not just to look at one race, but to look at 3 different races and make sure that our processes are going correctly. The precincts and the locations are randomly selected. Some counties use what they call a risk limiting audit, which actually does not specify county, it specifies ballot. And they go through a process that picks random ballots across their county. Those typically are used by larger jurisdictions because you can actually count fewer actual ballots to get the same quantification of results in the fact that you can verify the process on fewer ballots. And that's part of the reason that some counties use that process. And once we get to the end, we have to match our tabulation results. And if we don't, then we have to expand the audit. What I will tell you is generally Ohio is really good at this because, once again, we've went through the testing process before election. We go through a testing process called logic and accuracy before we ever start an election. And that helps ensure that when we get to the end and are doing our audits, that they're very accurate.
Thank you for explaining that process. Excuse me. Jess, could you tell us what mechanisms are in place to ensure that the voting machines that are used in Ohio are secure and reliable?
A lot goes into ensuring that voting machines used in Ohio are secure and reliable. Before they even hit the streets, a voting system must undergo examination and be approved by the Ohio Board of Voting Machine Examiners. Their approval makes it eligible for purchase and implementation in the state. So if they do not pass that thorough matrix of requirements, then they don't even get to be up for grabs in Ohio. They're not even eligible to be used. Once these machines are selected by a county, election officials follow procedures before and after every single election that are used to ensure the security and reliability of the machines. As Terry said, logic and accuracy testing is conducted to ensure that the voting systems are accurately and uniformly tabulating votes. Any piece of equipment that is deployed during an election, as well as the backup equipment, undergo LNA to ensure that the equipment behaves as it is programmed to do. For paper-based ballot counties, this testing also ensures that the ballot is properly designed, that it can be read by both location-based scanners and central count scanners. Touchscreen counties, it ensures that voters are able to accurately make their selections. Following LNA, machines are secured with barcoded seals that are documented to ensure that machines are not tampered with prior to the election. And at the end of the election, they're sealed again. Once those machines make it back to the board, they will be inspected, they will be reviewed to make sure that they are in good condition, that nothing questionable happened. And throughout this whole process, there is a chain of custody that exists, tracking those barcodes, tracking the movements that the machines made, accounting for everywhere that that machine went to make sure that it is safe and secure.
Thank you. That's very helpful. I know a lot of us don't get to see the whole process of the machine, so it's nice to know how that goes. This question I have is for both the election directors. How do election officials address concerns or allegations of irregularities or fraud during the post-election process?
I can go first. First of all, I'd like to use the security tools that the Secretary of State has, which would be, it's a colored brochure, and it just goes through the exact steps of what we've been discussing now. It talks about the audits, it talks about the machines being certified, it talks about how we secure our ballots. So I like to have something physical to maybe give somebody. And I also like to talk and do outreach to maybe some of those hard groups that are maybe denying some of the elections. And if you give them this concrete evidence and you show about the audits and how things are done, and I'll reiterate what Jess said, when you have those LNA testing and you have those public tests and you invite them in, I like to tell the story that my public test, I have done it for over 11 years now. And you invite that to the public, you invite them, you open it up. And in all my years, I've only had 4 people show up. So, but that is our chance to show that the machines are not hooked to the internet, to show them, our procedures, and that, that the zero reports and the chain of custodies and all those. And also, I like to use also my poll workers as election educators. They're the ones that the election deniers are coming to and asking the questions. So when they talk about the bipartisan team, oh no, that doesn't happen. We drove that back in a bipartisan team. So again, it's a lot of outreach, it's a lot of education, it's a lot of taking the time to actually explain it to them when they ask the questions.
Yeah, and I just could echo a lot of what Michelle said. It really is the education component. People generally, they hear things on the news, they hear things in the cycle. Not all states vote the same. And I think that's important to understand is the voter rules and processing rules change and vary from state to state. So just because you saw it on the news doesn't mean that same thing can happen here. And so just going through an educational process and trying to make sure that you're getting good information to the voters, be that through personal interaction, be that through your website or through your social media reach out. And just once again, trying to address specific concerns and how we mitigate them. Sometimes I run into people that are just starting to think about elections and voting maybe for the first time in a deep way. Michelle and I have been around for a while. I mean, I've been thinking about this for 30 years. I mean, even 30 years ago, we wanted to do elections right. And so we've been trying to put in place procedures to make sure that the people that should be voting are voting, the people that shouldn't aren't, and that, that ballots are counted correctly. And we go through that whole process. But once again, I think it's just a matter of being willing to have those conversations with people and to identify where their concerns are and how we try to mitigate that risk. And going through that process, hopefully you can have a good dialogue. That's not always the case, but you do your best to try to create a dialogue with the person where you can at least show them how you go about your business.
Yes, thank you both for that. And thank you for helping answer some of these questions while we're here today. Jess, what are some of the most common misconceptions that voters have about the post-election process, and how can we address that?
This will echo a little bit of what Michelle has already said. One of the most common misconceptions we hear is that ballots received or processed after election night, such as provisional ballots or those vote by mail ballots that come in after election day, aren't counted or are only counted when a contest is close. And that's absolutely false. In fact, like Michelle said, components of these ballots are quite carefully checked to ensure that all valid ballots are counted. In Ohio, provisional ballot envelopes are reviewed to ensure that the required information has been completed to determine if it should even be open and sent for counting. Vote by mail ballots received post-election are reviewed to verify that they are postmarked by the day before the election so that they can be counted, that all of the information on the ID envelope is valid. And in cases where a provisional ballot can't be counted or a vote by mail ballot might not be postmarked timely, those ballots don't even make it out of the envelope. There is just no question about those ballots. They are isolated, they are retained, but they don't even make it into the circle where they could be counted or tabulated. Also, the idea that election night is results night, it's not. The election is a process, and there are a few extra days in there where valid ballots can be received or reviewed. And then that being said, the results aren't final until we certify. And so truly letting our election officials have the time that they need to do that job properly. They gave us 28 days to vote by mail, to have that opportunity, and we need to give them some time to do their counting and to make sure that the results that they are releasing are accurate and correct.
Thank you for that. To both of the election directors, I know we've kind of covered some of this in some of your other answers, but could you explain more about what steps that Ohioans can take to be involved or advocate for secure and accessible elections, especially at the local level?
I'll jump in first, Michelle, since you jumped
Okay.
in last time. Volunteer to be a precinct elections official. That really is one of the main things that you can do to ensure the election security. If you have a concern or want to be involved and advocate for secure voting, that's how you help your neighbors vote. That's how you go through the process to ensure that your community, your local community, is able to vote in a safe and secure way. And seeing it firsthand is the absolute best way to really get comfortable in the process. And then just learning about the elections process. You obviously, there's a whole lot of topics that you can't rely on the news to really educate you about a process, and certainly elections is one of those. And so, if you have questions, reach out to your local board of elections. We are happy to do presentations. We're happy to, just have conversations on the phone. And once again, by doing events like this, we're actually able to reach people and explain how the process works. And that is a kind of a cascading effect that goes from, not only the folks on our call today, but will then pass on to whoever their circle is that they have. And I just think that's the most important thing that we can do is to talk about the process.
Yeah, I reiterate everything that Terry said. It is seriously just about asking the questions instead of spreading false hoods and rumors and mis and disinformation. Just pick up the phone and call our office. Or, Terry, when you're out in public, you still answer all those questions. So again, just be election educators. Again, poll workers. You may have a poll worker that doesn't really believe in the process, but after they see how things are done, they are the ones then that tell their friends. And another great example that we do is go to your county fairs. Go to your fair and have a small election and have your machine there. Maybe it be, of veterans, and have them vote. And just have your machines, be in the public, be visible. Have your Girl Scouts come in and their parents then come in and have them maybe vote on their favorites. And that's how it gets the ripple effect. Once you have people and it's part of the discussion, you will actually have election educators then, the ripple effect, and then they'll let them know how elections is actually ran.
Yes, thank you both for that. And just as a kind of personal note, the first time that I was a poll worker, I took that away too, just seeing like all the processes and how they happen. And I always tell everybody that they should do it at least once just to see how the process works, and because it's a good thing to do to have accessible voting. But yes, thank you for that about how we can get involved. Jess, how are public meetings held by election boards useful for maintaining transparency in the election process?
Board meetings are an incredible resource. They offer a lot of transparency to the process. One function of the board is to approve many of the steps that take place during an election cycle, such as approving the ballot, approving polling locations. And so that gives you some insight into the phase of the election cycle or where the board is at in their preparations. Also, you will understand then what vendors they might be working with or how the process is going. Board members also acknowledge directives received by the received from the Secretary of State. And so this gives insight into updates to existing protocol or implementation of new programs or rules, especially if those happen within 90 days of the election. There may be discussion or questions from the board about those directives, might give more insight to the intention or the implications of a directive. The board approves vouchers and resolutions, so that sheds light on how and what money is being spent on to administer elections. Also, more recently and more often, we're seeing voter registration challenges that will be presented in this forum. And finally, the public comment section is not necessarily helpful to the transparency of an election, but it does give some insight into the current temperature or the vibe that elections might be having in your particular county or across the state.
Thank you for that. And also for you, Jess, what can the media and public advocacy groups do to improve public confidence in the accuracy of Ohio election results?
There are several ways that the media and public advocacy groups can help us. First, and probably the most difficult, again, is not to speculate the official result. Election night is exciting. It's easy to get wrapped up in that energy. But again, election night is not results night, and that's okay. Election officials have their processes and procedures that they're going to follow. And again, we need to give them that space and time to do that. For example, the provisional envelopes and the vote by mail envelopes we talked about earlier, they're inspected and reviewed in that 4-day cure period that Michelle mentioned. They can't even be opened, scanned, tabulated until the official canvass begins. So there are still valid ballots whose votes are unknown, have not even seen the light of day. And we need to give time for those ballots to make their way through the process. The results are not final until they are certified. And the second thing to echo again, go to your election officials, go to your Board of Elections for the correct information, whether it's timelines, deadlines, general information. They are the most trusted resources when it comes to election questions. And nobody loves to talk about their work more than an election official. Do not hesitate to ask them the questions that you have. Understand they're busy right now, and so you might not get an immediate response, but they do want to assure you, they do want to educate you, and they do want to make sure that you know that you can trust elections in Ohio.
Thank you. And thank you so much for all the great information you've given us today. I'm going to go, we have quite a few questions in the Q&A, so we're going to try to get through those. Our first question comes from Josh. It's a question from 13 ABC in Toledo for Terry. Is it accurate that Wood County has seen one person challenge about 16,000 voter registrations? And how has that created challenges for you and your staff? And could you explain what safeguards are in place to ensure accurate voter rolls?
Yes, we did have a voter challenge before this cycle, right before the close of reg, of about 16,900 of our voters. We have to, obviously take that seriously. We have to hold a hearing on it. There were a lot of assist from our prosecutor's office to go through that process and make sure we did it correctly, and that our board was advised of what the appropriate rule was for the different challenges. Basically, the voter challenge rule in Ohio was set up to allow an individual who believed that someone is on the rolls that shouldn't be, based on address, based on not being a citizen, and basically, mainly over the years, you see the address question. So where I've had 2 voter challenges before this year, and now we've had quite a few others this year. But mainly it would revolve around a small community where someone moves and they are at another address, maybe their parents' address, and they don't acknowledge that they actually moved away, and that one of the local citizens challenged that they were no longer a resident of a village and they moved. And so our board would go through a hearing process to hear both sides of that. The voter would be given an opportunity to speak, and the challenger would be given a right to speak. And basically, the board would decide a residency question. Now that these challenges are coming in mass, mainly because of computerization, people are taking the information and data mining it out. They're able to do these challenges on a much larger scale. But it does eat time at a moment when your board is trying to get ready for a very major election. And so that's been a little bit of an issue for us. But we were able to get through that. Our board did deny those challenges. We did have a couple in there that were deceased people that we were able to correct our records on. And there was another individual that we were able to correct the record on, but the remainder of those, so there were 3 individuals that we actually changed out of the 16,000. The rest remained on the rolls. And so that's that process. And it has been a challenge for us, but I know a lot of boards have been dealing with this, and it's something that we're moving through and getting better at to make sure that we once again, we want all the people that should be voting to be on the rolls, and we want anyone that shouldn't be eligible to be off our rolls. And so we want clean data, and we're doing everything we can through the state process. And the state has gotten much better about providing information to us to make sure that our data is clean. And I think probably without question, we have the cleanest data for this election than we have had in any time in my career.
Thank you for that. Our next question is from Justin. With the flood of disinformation that is likely to flood the internet in the aftermath of this election, regardless of the outcome, how can people maintain a sense that they are getting true information and not being lied to or manipulated?
I believe it just is the source of where you're getting the information. So again, talk to poll workers, ask the questions, just, and really if they would learn our processes and procedures, then they wouldn't be spreading the falsehoods. So again, I always say this, a ballot cast has to be a ballot counted, or if there was a poll worker error, and it is very slim. So again, just reiterating our processes, what we do, how we do our audits. Again, the big word was about forensic audits, and it was so great to say that Ohio, hey, we already do audits. So things like that, and just the processes of how we actually do it. And then that their questions, then they will believe in the system.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to add to that? Good. All right, let's go to the next question. All right. Our next question is from Debbie. Which of your various steps are in place for the first time with this election?
Thank goodness Ohio generally doesn't change a lot of election law during a big election year. That's not perfect, but it generally is true. The thing that I think is particularly new for voters this time is there's a Dropbox affidavit. People that are dropping a ballot off for a family member now must come into our office and fill out an affidavit just indicating that they're doing it for a family member or for a person that is disabled. And that's probably the main new rule this year. Some people that haven't voted since the last presidential are also going to find the ID requirements have changed since the last presidential. We don't change a lot of rules during presidential elections, but between them they do. And so that may be something that people want to make sure that they have either their driver's license or their state ID, a passport, or a military ID. And that's probably the main things that I can think
of. As well, those 2 items. And it's funny because they voters think they're up on elections and they know, and it's funny that they're the first ones that say, oh, I didn't have to do that before. And we say, yes, that now it's in place and you have posters that you can point to and say, these are the valid IDs. So again, I'm the same with Terry. It's the affidavit that has to be filled out that maybe they're not familiar with, or also the IDs. And I actually liked when I could see it was an elderly voter and they came in and they were so excited and they had their phone and I knew what they were going to do. They pulled that up and they had that mobile ID and they were so proud. And I said, oh, ma'am, I'm sorry. That's not an acceptable ID. So they didn't have their regular ID. So she's like, okay, I'll go home and get it. So again, it's just things that change. But again, our voters will be used to that. They'll be adapted to it. And the next time it'll be okay.
Thank you. Those are important things to note about the IDs this year. Our next question is from Barb. Is it true that all absentee ballots, mail and in person, are sent to the SOS office first?
Absolutely not. All the ballots are sent back to the Board of Elections. Now, you may have heard maybe if like little local Wapak post office, maybe we take the ballots there, they have to go to Columbus and then back, but actually not. The absentee ballots come back directly to the Board of Elections. And again, if they're hand carried, they can drop them off in our box, or they can bring them back up to our Board of Elections office. And I would like to, because this question might be coming next, absentee ballots are actually counted first. So they're the ones that are counted and tabulated, and that is our first report to the Secretary of State's office at 7:45. We get that question during early in person many times. So again, absentee ballots are counted first.
Thank you. Does anybody else have anything they want to add? All right. Our next question from Kathy. Historically, do unofficial results on election day vary much from the audited and certified results across the state?
As Jess explained very well, yes, they do. They vary a little bit because there's still ballots to be counted. I mainly have these conversations with candidates whose races are close because they need to, once again, you need to set expectations for what, when a recount's going to come into play and when it's not. But voters should have similar expectations. So between the unofficial and the official, there are still ballots out there that are eligible. These absentees that are postmarked by that Monday that come in that 4-day period, and those provisional ballots that are deemed to be countable. And so, yes, you're going to have changes in the results because there are more ballots. Now, once you get to the official, all the information is there. So between the official and the recount, it shouldn't change. Between the official and the audit, it shouldn't change because you're not adding ballots. So sometimes candidates get excited because if they're closer by the official than they were in the unofficial, they think they have momentum and they can keep going. But that's a fallacy because now we're not adding any more ballots. You were adding ballots because you had more ballots to be counted, and now you don't. And so I think that's the important thing to understand in that process.
I will give an example of our county. We had a small village mayor race that was tied. We had one outstanding provisional ballot. So that was going to be the winner. Everybody knew that the person came and cured on the last day, and he didn't even realize the what, and then by what his vote was actually who decided the winner of the contest. So it does, especially like Terry said, in small races.
Wow, that's quite a story. Every vote really does count,
Yes,
right?
it does.
All right, our next question is from Anne. Can Terry please explain how paper ballots are used for the audits? In my county, I vote using a touchscreen. what is the paper ballot that would be used to verify the audit?
So on your touch screen, when you get to the end of the voting process, it has basically what looks like a receipt printout that is on the printer that is attached to that unit. Every unit in Ohio that's a touchscreen unit is required to have a printout of your ballot. And you have the opportunity to view that, make sure that it matches what you intended to vote before you cast your ballot. So when we go through the audit process, we use those receipt tapes as the official ballot. And so we go through a process where we unroll those tapes and we go through vote by vote to make sure that when we get to the end of that machine, we look at the machine total. We have the totals from every vote that was on that piece of paper, and they should match. And so that's how we go through the process of making sure that every vote that was on that machine matches the paper copy that we see. And so we do not rely necessarily just on the tabulation totals. We use those paper copy receipts to go through our process. And once again, it's also good to know that when we do this audit, we're auditing every facet of every precinct. We're auditing not only the votes on those machines at the polls, we're auditing the absentees that were cast for that precinct early by mail. We're also looking at those votes that were cast in our early vote center. And so we audit every facet of that process for those precincts or those locations that we're auditing. And so each and every one gets equal attention, and it once again kind of verifies the whole system.
Mm-hmm. And may I add, in an audit, you also need all those locks and seals. You also need all those chain of custody forms for proof of, hey, we had to take Ward 2 50 more ballots. So you have to have proof of all that as well in the audit.
Thank you for that. Our next question is from Marcia. Regarding absentee ballots, what is the chain of custody on those? Do they arrive and stay at the Board of Elections, or are they delivered to precinct and scanned there along with in-person ballots? And is there a designated time when they are opened, day of election, after polls close?
I will
Ohio,
tell you,
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
Michelle. Ohio is really lucky. Election officials are able to process vote by mail ballots throughout the cycle. We don't wait until election day to start. We can kind of do some of the work up front. That being said, election officials will review ID envelopes, verify that the information is correct. They can take the ballots out of the envelopes. They can send them for scanning. They are not tabulated though until election day. So there is no knowing results. There is no knowing where things stand. But they are permitted to do a lot of that front work, a lot of that leg work, so that on election night, Ohio voters do see results at that first upload. They don't go to polling locations. They stay in the county. They go through the central count process. And again, those results are safeguarded until election night. And I don't know if I'm missing
Absentees
part of
here
the
too,
question.
whether they come across the counter, it's a bipartisan team that checks them in, reviews them, does the signature verification, and then they're put in a locked cupboard that has a DNR lock on it, and then they're put into their specific precincts. So, and a drop box, 2 people, a DNR, we go down to the drop box 3 times a day, carry those ballots up, give them to our bipartisan team to check in. We take them outside of their envelopes again, make sure all their ID envelopes are correct. And then again, then we put them in locked cupboards, and then a bipartisan team retrieves them, opens them, and then can scan them. But like Jess said, not tabulate them until 7:30 p.m. on election night, because you have up until 7:30 to bring your absentee ballot back on election night.
Something with that too, we don't take them to the polling locations. Also, you can't return your ballot to a polling location. So if you are at that point, either please do take it to your drop box on election day, or at that point, consider voting provisionally at your polling location, because that absentee ballot cannot be accepted by the poll worker and be counted.
Mhm. And I will say 2 of our board members, bipartisan team, are out there at the ballot box at 7:30.
Thank you so much. Our next question is from Mindy. She says, this is continually asked, but an official answer would help. If I register to vote, I am then in the mix to be picked for jury duty. Please respond to this.
That is
Any-
true. We actually are the ones that do the jury draw. We provide the list to the common pleas court for them to actually pick. So it is registered voters. Absolutely. And a lot of people call and say, I didn't register to vote. And it's funny when you can go look on their record and say, were you at the BMV on your birthday 2 years ago? That's when you registered. So you are in the jury draw.
Yeah, and the other thing to note is common pleas courts in each county can make some decisions about exactly how they go through that process. Some counties also can include driver's license information. Not all counties choose this, but many of the counties, in fact, our county continues to just use voter registration, much like Michelle said. But they do have some options, but certainly if you register to vote, that does put you in that pool. For, once again, common pleas and municipal courts. Federal courts use a whole different system. So if you get called for federal jury duty, it's not us.
Don't blame us.
Our next question is from John. What safeguards are in place to guard against modification of election results by elected officials?
Can you say that again?
Yes. Hold on, let me pull it up again. What safeguards are in place to guard against modification of election results by elected officials?
First of all, we take the oath. Second of all, it is a bipartisan team. I think somebody asked this. It's actually a Republican and a Democrat. So it's of opposite parties who hold each other accountable. So there's no way that somebody can, do that because it's the bipartisan team.
The nice thing about how Ohio is set up is they, and I'll say this, I don't always say this about government, but in their wisdom in this case, they put us under the authority of the Secretary of State's office at the state level, but yet our budget comes from our county commissioners. And by dividing up those two, they try to limit the political influence that can come into our office from an elected official. And so, we basically do certify our own results. We don't have, anybody tell us how it has to be in our county. And while we do take that USB, like Michelle said, and upload results to the Secretary of State website, we hold the official records at the county level. And so if for some reason a website, and for those media on the call, I apologize, I'm not calling you out, but if a media source reports a different result than we have, it's still our official results that matter. Websites are a convenience and a way for people to get this information, and they're important that they're right. But in the end, it doesn't matter if those sites are right. What matters is the official results at the county level.
Thank you. All right. Our next question is from Kathy. She says, thank you for your time and information. I served with the League of Women Voters election protection in the past, and it was a very good experience. I know there are security issues related to poll workers being able to work a shift instead of the full day. Is that being considered for the future?
We have talked about this, Terry, in our association and such, but it would be, can you imagine? I have to have 150 poll workers. Can you imagine if I had to train and recruit 300 poll workers? It's just not something that we're capable of doing in those numbers now. I believe the last count, Terry, was 39,000 poll workers in the state of Ohio for this election. if we had to recruit 80,000, it would be a struggle. So that is why we can't do and don't do split sessions.
Well, and I know whenever I'm out in public and talking about this subject always comes up. And it does feel on its face that it might be a logical way to get more people in the pool to work. Would it get double the amount of people in the pool to work? I tend to agree with Michelle, probably not. It would open the door for some, but it would not be something that everyone would want. But I think the important thing to look at when it comes to the security is I always hearken it back to when I was in college, I worked at the Kroger grocery store. And when I started my shift, they gave me my cash drawer that I carried in my register and I put in my register. And when I finished my shift, I carried my cash drawer back and they audited that cash drawer because that was just mine. And so, it couldn't be altered by anybody other than me unless I did something to do that. When it comes to poll working and shift changes, then you have a question of if there is something that doesn't add up, if there's something that you can't quite figure out. Right now, we can go to one individual, the location supervisor, the location manager, or the precinct manager, depending on how you're set up, and ask, what happened here? What can you tell me about this? And typically you get a very good answer. When you have a shift change, now you have two people, and it can quickly become, the fingers pointing at each other. Well, I didn't do it. I didn't do it. And once again, I'm not saying that these people intentionally would ever do anything wrong, but you've now added doubt into the system that just is something that becomes a little unmanageable in, once again, that chain of custody. And I know Michelle will definitely agree with this. The other thing is we have one point in our day that is almost pure terror, and that's the beginning of your day, that you want to make sure that everybody shows up. And now you would be having 2 points in your day that you'd be having pure terror, because not only are you in the second shift worrying about, is everyone going to show up? But if they don't, is the person there going to be willing to stay? Do you run short shifted for half a day and not the whole day? There's all sorts of implications that come into that I just think make it problematic. And I know that our association doesn't agree certainly enough to push that forward.
Thank you. That was a great question. I hear that one a lot. Next question. What happens to vote by mail ballots that have insufficient postage?
Our counties actually have to pay. It comes out of our reply mail, and it is paid by the county. We get a report, it'll come in an envelope, and it'll actually deduct that amount that ballot cost to send back. So it still gets here, it still comes with the regular mail, and it's still a valid absentee, providing everything is there.
Yeah, the U.S. Postal Service is required to deliver it to us.
Thank you. That's good information. This one we already covered. Let's see. I feel like we kind of already covered this, but maybe not this specifically. Peter asked, are early in-person ballots counted and reported alongside the absentee ballots that are reported first?
They're all included. So it's actually absentee early in person, absentee by mail. You're voting absent of the polling location.
Thank you. Our next question is from Debbie. How many Ohio counties have an early vote center that is separate from its Board of Elections? I don't know if you guys know that.
I don't know that answer. Do you, Terry?
I do not. I'm not sure.
All right, Debbie, you stumped us with that one. We'll have to circle back to you on that one. Our next question is from Steven. What's the number one worry or fear each director has heading into the big day?
I think the number one is in the morning, like Terry said, that everybody is there All the e-poll books are turned on. They've all been sworn in. They're all ready. And if you are prepared for this thing, it should go without a glitch. Some may have some little incidences, but again, let's reiterate, most things are just poll worker error. Something that may happen that they tap the wrong person or something like that. So the biggest concern is just that everything is up and running the way it should at 6:30 a.m.
All right, thank you. We're almost done with our questions here. Last question here is from Judith. Do you see a time when there will no longer be an election day, perhaps an election month by mail or directly at the Board of Elections?
I don't think so. A general election, it will always be the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November. So I don't think that we will go away from election day. In fact, I like it when they talk about if they can put in law that election day would be a holiday. So that everybody can go vote.
That would be great. Does anybody else have anything to add? All right, well, that was our last question. We did put some resources in the chat if anybody wants some further information. And like we said, we will have this recording for you later if you missed anything or for you to review and share. So thank you again to our panel for being here today. Really appreciate you helping answer some of these questions that we have about the post-election process. I personally find it fascinating to see all the checks and balances, and I know it's a really busy time for you all, so we really appreciate you giving us your time today.
You're welcome. Thanks for having us.
Yep, great to be here.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.